Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to Paranormal TV. I am at St Anne's, Little St Anne's, Lancashire. I'm here to attend New Horizon St Anne's and do my lecture, which is entitled Skeptics. Who are they? Why are they wrong? And why does it matter? Please note there is going to be a top quality version of this event. The New Horizons are actually producing a quality DVD of this event which you can buy. This is just a low quality version that I produced myself. But so please do purchase the DVD when it comes out. It makes a brilliant gift. In the meantime, I'm going to proceed to the venue. I'm going to have a bit of fun and a bit of enjoyment. It should be a good evening. It's the first time I've done this speech, so while I'm a bit nervous, not done it before, I need a bit of need to know whether it works or not. I've been rehearsing it to a stain, been preparing for it for about a week, but it's the first time ever I've presented this lecture, so will it go right, will it go wrong? We'll soon find out. Anyway, hope you'll accompany me and I hope you enjoy the show.
In your pocket, you know what it's cooking. Massive welcome back to Ben Emlyn Jones. There were some questions of skeptics asking, who are they? Why are they wrong? And why does it matter? The sceptical mind has a range, including healthy and robust.
Rob.
What?
You start again.
Okay.
Sorry, mate. Take two.
What, even good evening?
Go on, mate. Yeah.
Oh, go on.
Right from the very beginning.
Okay.
You come in again.
Hey?
You come in again.
Me?
I put them off because I just suddenly remembered something.
Laughing now. Good evening.
Good evening.
If you do have a mobile phone, if you would like to put it on silent, please. Thank you. Right, massive welcome back to Ben Emlyn Jones. There are some questions of skeptics asking, who are they? Why are they wrong? And why does it matter? The sceptical mind has a range, including healthy and robust, frightened, closed or fixed. Ben tonight challenges some of the skeptics who appear to support the maintenance of the status quo and mainstream thought. Also those who may use blanket terms to describe those who ask awkward questions or present decent quality evidence that challenge what others consider consensus, thereby possibly delaying or even sidestepping the truth pertaining to major events. So please welcome Ben Emlyn Jones.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you. Now it's yeah, it works. Bingo. Yeah, well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I mean, it's great to see you. Some of you I know already, and I've seen you before, and I haven't seen you for a while, so wonderful to see you all again. And so this is me. Well, that was me, the portering Buddha. And my name is Ben Emlyn Jones, and I was a hospital porter for 23 years, and I lost my job in rather, what I think is rather suspicious circumstances. I'm one of many people. The full story of how that happened, actually I think I discussed that on the first time I was a speaker here at New Horizons St Anne's, so it's a bit of an interesting story. Now, skeptics, right. Are there any skeptics here this evening? Good. Welcome. You're going to have the night of your life, I promise you. Yeah, so who are they? Why are they wrong? And why does it matter? Why does it matter? Now, I have actually lifted the subtitle of my lecture from this book, which I'll talk more about in a minute. What skeptics say about the paranormal, why they are wrong, and why it matters. This is Randi's Prize by Robert McLuhan, which I very much recommend. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it's the thing, I mean, presumably those of you who are not skeptics, you have some kind of what the skeptics would call a belief. That is, I'll be discussing the meanings of those words as well. But in other words, you believe that something like ghosts, the paranormal, spiritual issues, UFOs, conspiracy theories, you believe that some of these are true. If you're not a skeptic, I'm guessing that you believe some of these are true. This means at some point, though, you will encounter skeptics if you haven't already, and I'm sure you have. It may be a friend of yours, it may be a stranger you bump into down the pub and get talking to, it might be a member of your family. But you will encounter somebody who will say that that's not true. Okay, this is why. And you'll get once you get caught in a corner by these guys, you inevitably end up in a debate. And it's very interesting indeed. About it's a phenomenon, a sort of psychological phenomenon that I think is worth looking into. And goodness knows the skeptics themselves have treated us as psychological subjects. So I think it's only fair that we return the favour, quite frankly. So in order to try and answer this question about skeptics, who are they, why they are, why that matters, who or who they are, I've actually done what very few people on our side of the debate do. I've actually gone to skeptic events, I've read skeptic literature, and I've watched skeptic film productions, documentaries and things like that, in order to try and understand and get inside their head. That's quite something. I wish I could become a skeptic for a day. I think that's the only answer, although I might end up liking it, so probably just as well I can't. But again, this is the book I mentioned. It's Randi's Prize by Robert McLuhan. This is a pretty big skepticological book. So I've read it. I've also studied some of the people on our side of the debate who are doing what I'm doing and investigating the skeptic movement as an object, as from the point of view of someone like me who, I don't know, the collective word skeptics use for us is woo-woo. They call us, it's a derogatory term, but that's what I am, according to their language. In other words, I believe that certain things such as UFOs, conspiracy theories, ghosts, spiritual issues, I think these things are true. So that would make me, in their terminology, a woo-woo. Now, the thing about skeptics is how they define themselves is probably a good place to start. And this is from Oxford Skeptics in a Pub. This is an organisation of which I'm a member and I regularly attend their meetings. A skeptic is one who rigorously and openly applies the methods of science and reason to all empirical claims. A skeptic provisionally proportions acceptance of any claim to valid logic and fair and thorough assessment of available evidence, and studies the pitfalls of human reason and the mechanics of deception so to avoid being deceived by others and themselves. That's how they define themselves. But I'm going to demonstrate for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that is not a description of what a skeptic is. That is a slogan. That is an aspiration, one which they do not fulfill. And they themselves seem to be unaware of this. I would define a skeptic more as someone who has an ideology. I say one who thinks, this is a basic definition I can come up with of a similar type. One who thinks that anything paranormal, supernatural, conspiratorial or spiritual is not real. A mode of thought, psychological state or cultural mean that has an affinity with normality or the prevailing paradigm in all subjects. So this is an interesting position. Now, what motivates someone to become a skeptic? This is what I don't know. And again, I've listened to them describe for themselves, and they're not always honest with themselves about why they become skeptics. Now I think I'm going to I'll start with the most important issue as well, of all when it comes to motivation, I think. And this is to do with one issue that skeptics and ourselves very often disagree on, or in fact almost always disagree on. And that is the question of what happens to us when we die. Now, there are several different views. This is certainly much closer to my own view of what happens when we die than a skeptic's view of when we die. Now, in philosophical terms, skeptics are almost always what we would call what is known as materialistic monists. That means that they believe that our consciousness, our thoughts, our feelings, everything that makes us is physical. It's a product of activity in our brain. It's a physical process, and that when the brain no longer works at the moment of our death, that process ceases to occur, and everything that defines us as what we are, is gone. Now, for skeptics, they see themselves in that sense. What they believe is, they believe that the reason people like us believe differently, I'm not believing whether it's a heaven or whether it's a spirit world or anything like that. They see that as, in a sense, a psychological defence net. It's something that we have concocted, a fantasy, to protect us from the awful reality, because we are a sentient species that is aware of our own demise, and our own demise is going to come. And in order to avoid having to deal with the uncomfortable realisation of that fact, we have essentially invented something that means we don't have to. And I'll give you some examples here. But first of all, I'd just like to say that I believe this idea of wishful thinking cuts both ways. And I think I'll play a couple of audio clips now to illustrate that a bit better. Okay, clip number 1, please.
One more, which is about meaningless. I'm going to ignore that slide. Meaningless at all. This is another good objection that comes up quite a lot. Oh, you people who are humanists, how awful, how pointless, how meaningless, how dry and arid and without form and purpose is your life. Humanism is nihilism. If there is no God, no future life, and the universe is a totally natural phenomenon, the universe has no purpose. That means our lives are meaningless. We might as well have never lived, because nothing means anything. I'm still young. I can do text speak. Is this text speak? No, it's not, is it? It's something else. Oh, I don't know. Anyway.
I don't know what he's talking about here. Sorry.
Pointlessness. Bertrand Russell responded to this very well, in a sense, by pointing out that what lies behind this is a fear of death. It's a fear of death. This is the problem here. Religion, he said, religion, since it has its source in terror, he didn't pull his punches. Religion, since it has its source in terror, has dignified certain sorts of fear and made people think them not disgraceful. In this it has done mankind a great disservice. All fear is bad. I believe that when I die I shall rot, and nothing of my ego will survive. I am not young, and I love life. But I should scorn to shiver with terror at the thought of annihilation. Many a man has borne himself proudly on the scaffold. Surely the same pride should teach us to think truly about our place in the world. And that's an important part of the response to this idea.
Yeah. I'm going to play clip number 2 now, please. And we'll play the entirety of that one. This is what I find if I've got them in the right order.
And perhaps the strongest is the fact that...
Professor Chris French.
And perhaps the strongest...
So I hope we'll be here this evening.
The fact that we are arguably the most self-aware species on the planet, and we are certainly aware of our own mortality. And that's something that most of us feel rather uncomfortable about. The idea that when the physical body dies, that's it, that's the end of consciousness. The idea that when our loved ones die, that's it, we'll never have any contact with them again. Most of us don't like thinking about those things. And so there's a strong pressure towards accepting any kind of evidence for life after death.
Right, now, I believe that what Professor French and what Andrew Copson... Can I go back to the slide? Oh, you're back on the slide, sorry. This is Andrew Copson, the first man you saw speaking. He's director of the British Humanist Association. Now, I believe that everything they've been talking about here in terms of psychological appeal cuts both ways. I'll explain to you what I mean. If you really do believe that there's no afterlife, and when you die that's it, it's all over, it makes you a pretty brave guy, doesn't it? It makes you pretty superior to all those quivering sheep, those worthless trembling fools, who can't even get out of bed without this crutch, this comforting afterlife myth. So therefore, I believe people in that frame of mind will be instinctively drawn, as Professor French said, in the other way around, to accept or to uphold evidence for the lack of an afterlife, and perhaps reject evidence which says that perhaps there is an afterlife. For that reason, because I think from what I know from talking to skeptics, this idea, which I call MBA, Materialist Bravery Award, is quite foundational to their sense of self-esteem. It's quite central to their identity as a group and as individuals. And so, if you took that away, I think that it might have a negative effect on their morale.
quite frankly. So therefore, that's why I believe that cuts both ways. I'll start with that bit because that I think is very, very important. Now, you often see skeptics on TV. The man on the right there is Professor Chris French, who you just heard talking. And here he is debating with Gary Heseltine, who is a ufologist who also appears on TV a lot to promote the idea of UFOs. Frenchy here is a skeptic, and this is them arguing on this morning. You can get that on YouTube. It's quite an interesting. It's an interesting thing to watch if you can. And again, there are people, celebrity skeptics, who do appear in the media and put the skeptical side of the argument across. And this is what you can do. I mean, if you want a career as a skeptic, I think this is the ultimate goal, really, to be one of these celebrity skeptics. Professor French is now retiring, and he's close to retirement now, and I think his replacement is already waiting in the wings, and I'll say more about that in a minute, and I'll reveal to you who I think that replacement is. The skeptic movement has a healthy social life, and it's a thriving community of well-organised events, meetings, organised both on the internet and in real life. This is a Skeptics in the Pub meeting. Now, there's over 100 of these in the country. Wherever you live, there's going to be one near you. And they're worth attending. Woo-woos, believers in all sorts of supernatural and conspiratorial nonsense, as they call us, we are welcome there. And you don't have to be a skeptic to attend. And these are a group of people here at a Skeptics in the Pub meeting. Very often they just get together in a pub and talk. Sometimes they hire a room and they bring in speakers and things like that. But it's well worth attending one of those. Quite an experience just to attend one of those. Now, as I said, there's what you'll find with skeptics is there's a guy called Michael Barkan who wrote a book called Culture of Conspiracy, which basically was a searing criticism of us. And what he said there was what he called the cultic milieu, which is if you believe in ghosts or UFOs, the chances are you're also going to believe in conspiracy theories. You're more likely to. Now, I think there is a skeptic milieu. I think what I found with skeptics is if you ever found yourself in a debate with a skeptic, and for instance you're talking about the 9/11 issue, and you claim that one should be suspicious of and question the official story. I'm sure this has happened to probably most people in this room at some point. It certainly has to me. Somebody, like I said, it could be a member of your family or a friend or just someone you bump into, a stranger, will say, that's not true. The official story is real, and this is because, and they'll reel off a list of arguments, which is what has been known as the debunking of the 9/11 true story. I will bet my bottom dollar, or my bottom penny, or bet the bottom anything else, that that person also doesn't believe that UFOs exist. I'd also bet pretty much that they are a political atheist and secularist. I'd also bet that they don't believe in ghosts. What you'll find is if people are sceptical about one thing, they tend to be sceptical about most other things, almost everything else. So there is the equivalent of a cultic milieu on the opposite end, or the antithesis to our own. If Michael Barkan is even correct in that. Now, why are they wrong? Now, there's not going to be one section of this lecture where I tell you why they're wrong and that's it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, over the course of this evening, I'm going to talk about various issues in which I think they're wrong. And I'll start with some of what I believe are skeptic fallacies. Now, one of the things that they will do, if you're in a debate with one of these guys, it's worth making a note of these points, so that next time you're debating them, you may be better. If they've left you sort of stumped and bamboozled, these points might make you better armed in future. One of the mistakes I think they make is raising the bar. That's it. This is a skeptic talking now. Demand evidence from your opponent for everything he says. Fair enough. I expect to provide evidence for everything I say. But when he delivers, demand more. When he delivers more, demand even more. Your thirst for evidence must be unquenchable. And this is known as raising the bar or shifting the goalposts. And you'll find they do this a lot, and they do it without even knowing they're doing it. They're not nasty people who are out to deceive us. They're deceiving themselves. They've been caught in a mindset which means they don't necessarily understand the mistakes they are making. Now, a good example would be if, now for instance, if an old man walking his dog one night around the environs of a military base in the woods sees a UFO, okay, the skeptic will say, well, there's not enough evidence here. He was the only witness. No one on the military base saw it. The security police who were guarding the base, they didn't see it, they didn't report anything. There's been no official reports from the base at all. If that happened, then I would believe it, but until then I'm afraid there's just not enough evidence. But what have I described in terms of what that skeptic just said, that I just impersonated? I've described the Rendlesham Forest incident, in which that actually did happen. In 1980 at Woodbridge Bentwaters Base, the security police guarding the base did encounter the UFO. There was an official report released by the base's deputy commander. But the skeptics still don't believe it. They've raised the bar, they've shifted the goalposts. Sock 'em with the Occam. Yeah. Occam is a razor, all things being equal. Most likely explanation is usually the right one. Now, Occam's razor is a problem-solving exercise, and it actually makes a lot of sense for systems that we actually understand. So, for example, what it means is always go for the most likely explanation for your problem first, to solve the mystery. If your radio breaks down, try changing the batteries before you open it up and fiddle with a screwdriver in its innards. The reason is, flat batteries are the most likely cause of a radio's malfunction. Now, the mistake the skeptics make is they apply this to things such as the paranormal and conspiratorial matters. Well, you can't, because you see, in order to apply Occam's razor to your radio, you need to know how it works first. In other words, Occam's razor only works in understood systems where you can actually assign different causes a hierarchy of likeliness, and assign them different levels of likeliness within that hierarchy. When you're dealing with the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, conspiratorial, spiritual matters, you cannot, because you are essentially dealing with an unknown quantity in which various explanations could be, one could be as likely as another or more likely. We don't know. So this is another fallacy of theirs. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary explanation. Now, I must say, this is actually a skeptic cliche. It was uttered by Carl Sagan a long time ago, and I think it even predates him. And if they hit you with this, this is just incidentally, you can really wear them up by uttering another skeptic cliche in an equally sort of like, wow, I've just said something original voice. So they say that to you, so yeah, you know something? I'll tell you something else. It's good to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out. Well, believe it is funny, but believe it or not, Neil deGrasse Tyson said that at a conference last year. And he still got a laugh from the audience. The skeptics like old jokes, and they always get laughs at them. But basically, to come back to the point here, what they're saying here is that they're assigning an arbitrary adjective to an explanation, and I think that is a mistake. Now, any explanation, any claim requires evidence, but the evidence should be suitable to the claim quantitatively. But that means if you see a UFO and you gather the data on it and it doesn't fit into weather balloons and Chinese lanterns, then that's a possible extraterrestrial sighting. The word extraordinary is simply an adjective that could apply to incredulous, unusual. It's kind of like, it's a bit of a non sequitur. It's a nonsensical statement, this, because it's saying, well, if you make a claim which I find out of this world, wow, crazy, then you need an explanation that makes you go, ooh, wow, crazy. Doesn't really make any sense. The Santa Claus gambit. Now this is interesting. Oh, sorry. Maybe skeptics can't rule out the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. We can't rule out the evidence of Santa Claus either, existence of Santa Claus. Does that mean therefore Santa Claus is real? Now this is kind of an adaptation of this fifth point here, which is the burden of evidence. Skeptics are not making the claims. The onus is on the believer to provide evidence that their claim is true, not on the skeptic for proving that it is not. The onus. Funny enough, I never heard that word onus until I came across this sentence, and I've never heard it since. But skeptics will say it over and over again. They love that word onus for some reason. But what this is actually saying is that it's the assumption that we're providing a negative statement, a negative claim. So we're saying, well, I saw a UFO, and you can't prove it wasn't there, so therefore it's real. No, that's not what good researchers say. Good researchers say things like, well, there is evidence, there's positive evidence this was here, and therefore it's the skeptic's job to actually explain why that evidence doesn't count, and so to debunk that. And the skeptics will say things like, well, I can't prove there's not an invisible pink unicorn orbiting Mercury out in space. And again, that's not what we're talking about. We're dealing with positive evidence here for the most part, from what I have seen. I've very rarely heard people say, oh, you can't prove me wrong, so therefore I'm right. In fact, if anything, it's the skeptics who are actually guilty of this kind of thing, because they will... One of the things the skeptics will do is they will actually they will use the phrase a rational explanation. They'll say something like, I'm sure there's a rational explanation for this. The moment they say that, they've tipped their hand, because the very phrase rational explanation is nonsensical. You cannot have a rational explanation. The adjective rational can only be attributed to a method, not to the outcome. The moment you say, what they mean by saying is a rational explanation is, I believe that everything skeptics say are rational a priori, therefore I believe that if a skeptic says something, then it is rational per se. And that is, again, they don't understand themselves how they got it wrong. Very, very rarely do you get a skeptic with that level of introspection, that the ability to look at themselves as if they were someone else and say, you're talking rubbish. So that's another thing they often hit you with, the burden of evidence again. They don't understand at all. Casting down. 9/11 truthers got it wrong about paying Stuart's jet because they forgot to take into account that it crossed different time zones. Let's talk about that for a while. So this refers to a mistake that was made by a researcher investigating NORAD response times over 9/11. He judged this was to do with an aircraft that went missing and was intercepted by jets organised by NORAD, and he was to say, well, how come they didn't do that on 9/11? How come they were so good on 9/11? Well, they didn't take into account the fact that the jet passed in a different time zone. What the skeptics are saying is they're looking at this nit and they're picking at it and they're saying, well, therefore it means the official story of 9/11 is true. And you can see how absurd that is. They're saying, because I can find one little flaw in this incredibly complex argument you put together, incredibly widespread, involving scientists and involving science, involving all kinds of things, therefore everything else you say is wrong. So that's another one. And finally, the sneer. Anyone who believes we've been visited by extraterrestrial aliens is wrong because... No, they don't say that. Must be a lunatic, a fool, or a con man. If you believe this, you must be a maniac, a simpleton, or a fraud, and all kinds of other adjectives. I mean, skeptics carry a thesaurus around with them. They really do. They can come up with all kinds of different creative ways of saying things like this. But there's no argument here, is there? This is rhetoric. Yeah. Oh. There's other methods they use as well. Now, one of them is, I guarantee this will have happened to you. Well, it could be a coincidence. Have you ever heard that? Hands up if you've had that. I bet, yeah, lots of hands go up. I bet you someone said, it could be a coincidence. Well, what couldn't be a coincidence? There's nothing physically possible in this world that is so unlikely you can say that cannot happen. There's a book called Beyond Coincidence, which is written by two authors, which is very, very good and interesting talks about this. And I got into a debate with Dr. Paul Rogers, who's a well-known sort of skeptic paranormal investigator. And he was making out this thing about coincidence, saying, well, you think you have synchronicities in your life, and strange things happen at certain times, and you think that's significant, you think it's your granny trying to get in touch with you from the other side. No, it's just a coincidence. And I said to him, okay, right, supposing I won the lottery, the national lottery, and I won it the next day, and I won it the next day, and I won it the next week, sorry, and by the time I won it 5 weeks in a row, all right, would you call that a coincidence? And he said, no, of course not. I said, okay, so where's the cut-off point? Where's the statistical ceiling above which you will accept that something is not a coincidence? And he couldn't answer me. He couldn't answer, because there is no agreed statistical ceiling where a skeptic will say, well, that's too unlikely to be a coincidence. And I mean, if that happened, you know, well, obviously I could afford a good lawyer, so I'd go to court and I'd stand up and I'd just say to the judge, Your Honour, I'm a very lucky guy, and I'd sit down again. And they'd have to acquit me, according to that logic. So until skeptics actually are willing to apply, to actually get involved, discuss and agree on a statistical ceiling, a cut-off point, then this is simply a get-out-of-jail. The coincidence thing is just a get-out-of-jail free card. The moment they use it, they're essentially saying, well, I'm just saying this because it's my little joker I'm playing here to just win the argument. Now, where do these skeptics come from? That's the question. They're just like, they're everywhere now, but I mean, where did skepticism begin? Now, well, the word skepticism refers to doubt, and there's a school of philosophical skepticism. There's several actually. that go back right through the history of philosophy to the ancient world. But what we're talking about here essentially is scientific skepticism, as it's known, wrongly, I think, and the idea that superstitious beliefs, as they call them, conspiracy theories, UFOs, paranormal, can be dismissed using the methods of the skeptic movement. The first person I can find actually who fulfills these kinds of criteria is this guy here. Now this is Lucian Samosata, and he lived in the 2nd century in Turkey. He was a Greek guy but lived in Turkey, and he was interested in people's beliefs and ideas of what he referred to as superstitious, and he said he was interested in seeing how they could be explained in mundane terms, what the skeptics would call a rational explanation. This is Michel de Montaigne. Now he was a 16th century French philosopher. He was an atheist, he was a materialistic monist, he didn't believe in the afterlife, he believed your brain was it, once your brain went, you went, etc. So he got his Materialist Bravery Award. I've actually sent Materialist Bravery Awards out to people. I've created little medals and I've actually posted them. I sent one to Chris French and to Andrew Copps, and I sent them in the post. This guy would have got one if he lived today. And his catch, he was a philosophical skeptic, and his catchphrase was, "What do I know? What do I know?" And it's similar to Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." This guy said, "What do I know?" And he was sort of he again looked into people's superstitious beliefs, religions, and things like that, and he tried to work out whether they could explain it in earthly terms. This is Miss Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown here is Sir Thomas Brown, who lived in Norfolk in the 17th century. He studied at Brasenose College, Oxford, and he was similar. He was very, very similar to Michel de Montaigne in that respect, and he was inspired by him indeed. But really, it was the 20th century, I think, when the modern skeptic movement really emerged. This is a key figure in the emergence of the modern skeptics, Harry Houdini. He was a stage performer, an illusionist, and he coined the phrase escapologist. His textbook trick was to escape from things. They used to lock him up in chains like this. They could put him in a box, in a bag vault or something like that. And he would find some way to break out. He broke out, he was locked in a milk churn and put under water, things like that. I mean, he was quite nail-biting tricks. When his mother died, he was grief-stricken, and he became very angry at what he saw as fake psychic mediums who were trying to basically prey on the vulnerable, make money off people through just tricks, and it wasn't really real at all. That's what he believed. And he was the first guy to put up a cash prize for anyone he thought who could actually perform under controlled conditions a real psychic challenge. It's interesting about when he died. When he died, he left a coded message with his wife Bess, saying that she should go to mediums and try and make contact with him, and if he came through, he would identify himself with a coded message. Now, according to most of skeptics now, they'll say, well, that never happened. He never came back and gave the coded message. But there are some sources, some older sources from old material, which actually said he did. So I don't have time to give you the details now, but it's a very, very interesting story. This is the world's first skeptic organisation in the modern sense. This is the Comité Para, set up in 1949, and this is in Belgium, and this means the Belgian Committee for the Analysation and Criticism of Parasciences, paranormal, things like that. Basically it's where skeptics got together and carried out experiments and investigated what they saw as loonies and cranks and other things to see if they were real or not. With the proviso, of course, that they were not, and I think that was kind of, despite their claims and their protestations, I think they do start off with that conclusion. That is the point of what they do. This is an organisation set up in 1976. CSICOP, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation into Claims of the Paranormal. Now, this was, I think, this is a key organisation, and it really launched not only the skeptic movement as we know it today, but also it's the way it's centred on the United States of America. That's America now is, I think, where the skeptic movement comes out of primarily, and this organisation, I think, helped that. Now, the people who were first joined it are very interesting. James Randi, Carl Sagan, Philip Klass, the UFO debunker, Chris French is a member, who we've just been talking about, Paul Offit, I'm talking about later. And one of the founders is a guy called Paul Kurtz, and I'm going to come back to him because there's a bit of a backstory to that guy. And they publish a magazine every 2 months, The Skeptical Inquirer, and they're talking there about the face on Mars and various other things like that. So that's their in-house magazine. Now I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to give a list of case studies now of various people. And I'm going to start with this guy because I think he is the central character, the pivot of the modern skeptical movement. This here is James Randi. Now he was born in 1928, just 2 years after Houdini died, and I can't help, any of you know anything about reincarnation and things like that? I just can't help wondering if this is a case of that, because they're very similar. Like Houdini, he was a magician, and he actually repeated a lot of Houdini's tricks and improved on them. Being locked in ice boxes of ice and things like that, and breaking out of chains while hanging over Niagara Falls. And in the 1960s, he became a skeptic, and he started investigating in a skeptic way. And he put up a $1,000 cash prize, the way Houdini had. And that $1,000 expanded to the point where today it is the famous $1 million challenge. And so that's said to be the bottom line in any skeptical investigation. It's not, and I'm going to say more about that later. Now this is James Randi here, with the man standing next to him is called David Pena, and he comes into this story as well. Now Randi and him are actually a same-sex couple, and they got married, but they knew each other a long time before that. So this guy's an interesting story behind this guy, and Andrew Johnson has talked about him too. So I'll be telling you a little bit more about him in a minute. Now, Uri Geller. Now this guy is one of the most famous paranormal stars in the world. He emerged onto the scene in around about 1970. He comes from Israel, and he announced that he could carry out psychic performances on stage, bending cutlery, making, finding out where water was, divining water, things like that. Basically, he's only got about 5 different tricks, but he made himself very famous performing them. Now, Randi was infuriated by this, because Randi was basically saying, well, hang on a minute, he's just doing the tricks that I'm doing. He's just doing, he's doing magic tricks, illusionism. He's not really psychic, he's just pretending to be. Now, so Randi pursued Geller an awful lot. He wrote a book about him called The Truth About Uri Geller, and there was a bit of a fight here, and Geller sued him. It was a long, complicated story. Basically, they hate each other. Randi and him, they absolutely hate each other. Now, James Randi, he set up his organisation called the James Randi Educational Foundation in 1996 to administer the $1 million challenge. And what he has said is, he said, just like Houdini did, he said, if you have a psychic power, come to me, I will test you under properly controlled conditions. If you pass, I will pay you $1 million US. And he very, very proudly announces, no one's ever passed. No one's ever even come close. He keeps saying that over and over again. Or have they? Now, there's an interesting thing about James Randi that he never talks about. And there's a lot of things that Randi talks about in his life. There's a lot of things about Randi that he never talks about himself. He's a showman. He puts on a public face, which is what a lot of skeptics do. Skeptics are very good at what I call the shop window. It doesn't matter what's happened. The shop window is always lovely, perfectly decorated. It doesn't matter if there's cockroaches in the basement and the books are blood red. The shop window is fantastic. What they talk about, what they say, what they appear on stage. And Randi he's the master of that. He's the master of putting up a brave face. And one thing he never talks about, and he's mentioned in this book here by Robert McLuhan, he analyses the $1 million challenge, hence the title Randi's Prize. And he casts doubt on the whole thing. Randi himself has been challenged. Now, I've got a friend called Ross Hemsworth. He used to present a TV series called Ghost Detectives, and he's a researcher into the paranormal, and he challenged Randi himself. He said, I once challenged James Randi to come to the UK and spend 6 weeks with my research team. At the time when I had money, LOL. I said if I convinced him that some paranormal events could not be rationally and logically explained, he should donate his $1 million prize to a charity of my choice. If, however, he could provide a rational and logical explanation for everything that happened, I would donate £100,000 of my money to a charity of his choice, which is presumably the JREF, James Randi Educational Foundation. He refused to take up the challenge. Why did he refuse? Now, when I started writing about this skeptic got in touch with me and they said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Ben. He's a busy man. He hasn't got time to take 6 weeks out of his schedule to come all the way across the Atlantic to do some silly tricks with a damn ghost hunter." And I replied, yes, 6 weeks in which he could earn a lot of money, £100,000, which he would be able to do easily, would he not? And I never heard from that skeptic again. He never replied to me again. Now this is, again, the way Randi describes things that happen to him and things he does is always in a very, very positive light. He always portrays himself as a flawless hero. Yet, if you look at other sources, they don't always match up with what Randi talks about. Now this is something called Project Alpha. Now what happened was, McDonnell Douglas, the company, the head of McDonnell Douglas, James McDonnell, he was very keen on psychical research, and he gave a $500,000 donation to the Washington University of Missouri, and said he's basically to set up a laboratory to test for psychic powers, people with psychic powers. So this $500,000 was donated, the laboratory was set up, and they put out an appeal for people who believe they have psychic powers to come and be tested in this under laboratory conditions by trained parapsychologists. Randi he does this a lot. Randi, he likes to play tricks on people. He says, well, I'm trying to bring light to this subject. I'm trying to explain to people how they can be fooled. But there's always a sadistic element to what he does, especially when he actually misrepresents these things and makes himself and his ideas look more better than they are. There were two guys called Michael Edwards and Steve Shaw. These two young chaps here. They were from school, and in 1979, at the start of the project, Randi inserted them into MATLabs. He actually told, go along, say you're psychic, and see how far you can get just doing your magic tricks. Because these guys are not psychic, and they don't pretend to be psychic. They are magicians. Shaw, the guy at the bottom, I believe, he goes under the stage name Banachek, and he is a top performer. Now, according to James Randi, it was a clean sweep. These two guys went in there, MATLabs never suspected a thing, and they passed, and then MATLabs made a great announcement on stage. They have found two real psychics in front of all the world's media. And then Shaw and Edwards come onto the stage and they say, we're not real, we cheated. And then MATLabs were left with bright red faces, and parapsychology was made to look like a stupid pseudoscience, and, game, set and match James Randi. However, if you look at other sources, for instance, there's a guy called Michael Thalborn who's written about this, it tells a very different story. To begin with, MATLabs never made any such announcement. They never ever declared that Shaw and Edwards were actually real psychics. In fact, they became a bit suspicious with them after the first phase of the trial, and eventually these guys were dropped. Now, Randi did make an announcement. He got them on stage, he made an announcement, but there's only a very short clip of that. And the reason there's only a short clip of that is because it's not an official MATLabs presentation. It was actually for Discover magazine. There were some people from MATLabs present, but Randi has, I think, misrepresented the gravity of all this situation, and I think he's overplayed his own success. Now, James Randi, I think, is, like I say, for the skeptics, he's a hero. He's a lily white. He's what they all aspire to be. He's the bottom line in truth, reason, and evidence. But is he? Could we play clip number 3, please, John? This is by Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake is going to talk about his own relationship with James Randi. Rupert Sheldrake is a researcher, a scientist.
So I guess the goal then is to...
Not this one, it's, where's it? That one there.
That one.
It's that one, I don't want to play one, sorry.
Dean came here earlier this year. I've been telling a lot of people about Psi. And basically, the conversation usually ends as soon as the person I'm speaking with thinks of James Randi. And they kind of put up a James Randi shield where they won't let anything get past. And
Yes.
I was wondering what your response to that is.
Well, for the benefit of those who don't know about him, there's a conjurer called James Randi who often appears on TV. And he's a very he's one of these ideologically motivated skeptics who believes science is impossible. And he's offered $1 million prize, or says he has. There's a lot of questions as to whether he actually has the $1 million or where it is, for any successful test of psi. And people often say, why don't you apply for the Randi Prize? Well, it's a very good question, and I can tell you my answer. First of all, this man is not a scientist. He has no scientific credentials or understanding. On his website it says the prize must be won for people who produce an unequivocal demonstration of psi abilities that requires no expert analysis. That seems to rule out any statistical experiments. Then he's later said, oh well, I will accept statistical experiments, but the odds against chance have got to be 1,000,000 to 1 to get the $1 million prize. So if the odds against chance are 900,000 to 1, you fail the test. Third, you sign over to Randi all publicity rights, you have all legal waivers. So he has complete control of all publicity arising from this. And fourth, and most important for me, he's a liar. He's a deceiver by profession, and he's a deceiver by nature. And my reason for saying this, without being sued for libel, is that he wrote an article in a magazine about my dog research called Dog World. Probably very few of you read Dog World, but lots of people do. In this he said that we at the James Randi Educational Foundation have repeated Sheldrake's experiments, they fail. Then he said, we've also examined all his videotape from his experiments and shown the dog goes to the window all the time, and it's not as he says it is. An unequivocal statement. I emailed him asking him to give me the details of the experiments he'd done. What journal were they published in? Where's the data? Reasonable questions that a scientist would ask. He didn't reply. I emailed again, he didn't reply. So I emailed his scientific advisory board, and they advised him to reply. So he then replied, and he said, well, actually, these experiments were done many years ago when I looked after a friend's dogs for a couple of weeks in New York, and I lost all the data. They were lost in a flood, so I've got no data, and they've never been written up. So what kind of evidence is that? If I produce evidence for science, say, well, I did them years ago, I've lost all the data, but just believe me, he wouldn't go for that, I'm sure. And then the examination of the videotapes, he had to admit he'd never seen the videotapes, he'd simply made that up. Now, with a man with such a low degree of honesty, I don't think he should be an arbiter of scientific credibility or truth. I do believe, however, that real skeptics, people with proper skeptic scientific training, and who have a track record of honesty rather than dishonesty, are worth engaging with, and that's why I'm doing joint experiments with Professor Chris French right now.
Thanks very much. Now, this guy is Carlos. Carlos is actually a channeler. He toured Australia in the mid-1980s and apparently fooled everyone into thinking he was a real channeler of spirit, and he was in touch with ancient descended masters and things like that. He packed out the Sydney Opera House, apparently. Now, that's actually not true. This guy was actually an actor, and he was inserted by James Randi into Australia and to pretend to be a channeler, just again, rather like Project Alpha, to see how far he could get. How many people could he fool? How could he get out? Is it possible? And the point that Randi was making is, well, if this guy can do it, someone else can, and this is how people can be fooled. The problem is, you might recognise this chap because I showed a picture of him earlier. That is Davy Pena, who is the husband of James Randi, and there's a bit of a backstory to him, which I'm going to go into in a minute, which I think calls question on his credibility, and also James Randi's. But credit where credit is due. This man here is Peter Popoff. He is a charlatan, provably through evidence. What happened was, in 1986, this guy is a Christian evangelist. He was going touring all over America. He was appearing at sell-out theatre tours. He even filled a football stadium once, where he's got this big loud Southern Baptist voice, and he would say, "Oh Jesus, pray for these people, heal them." He wanted people to be healed, and he would seem to know a lot about the people he was healing. He would tell them what their name was, what their condition was, and the medical condition, where they lived, things like that. And he said he was getting these messages from God. Well, he wasn't. He was getting them from a radio earpiece in his ear, and his wife was at the other end on the microphone. And Randi caught him with his hand in the cookie jar. He literally did, because he brought in a radio scanner and intercepted the radio messages which were coming to the earpiece. So well, you know, I mean, I can't fault him on that. I was absolutely right. This man is a charlatan, and he deserved he deserved to what he get. Now, skeptics will tell you they are the ultimate arbiters of evidence. You want to know what evidence is? Ask a skeptic. They are the experts. That they're not. I'm going to demonstrate to you now that they haven't got the first clue about what evidence is, and they display their ignorance regularly in a way which I personally would feel embarrassed about in their shoes. This is psychic Sally Morgan. Now, she was accused of pulling her pop off, and that sounds rude, of course, but it just simply means that she was accused of doing the very, very same trick that Peter Popoff was doing. This is more recent, though. This was in 2014 in Dublin and Ireland, where the complete hearsay was magically transformed, metamorphosed into solid fact by the skeptics through their imagination. And they're very good at imagination. I mean, this is the kind of thing they do. And now, what happened was, Sally was in Dublin, and someone reported to a TV station they heard voices at the back speaking into a microphone, and Sally had one of those earpieces in her ear, apparently. There's no actual footage or photographs of her with anything in her ear. And, well, I mean, in that situation, of course, if you suspect something like that, the thing for a skeptic to do would be to do what Randy did with Popoff, go into the audience with a radio scanner, pick up the transmission. This could have been a major coup for the modern skeptic movement. And to be honest, I'd be 100% behind them on that. If she is cheating, she needs to be exposed. The problem is they didn't do that. What happened was Paul Zenon wrote in the Daily Mail that she was using the same technique as Peter Popoff, a radio earpiece, he hadn't actually got any evidence for that. He hadn't done what Randy had done with Popoff. And I actually made this point to several skeptics, and they just didn't get it. This is really... And the result was that Sally Morgan was subjected to hate mail. She was sent, for instance, she was sent pictures of dead bodies. I'm going to come back to that because I believe there is a skeptic thug element which is targeted more than one person. She's one of the people that were targeted. Now, what happened was she sued the Daily Mail, and she won £135,000 in damages plus expenses, richly deserved too. But the skeptics are they're just running around in denial about the whole thing, saying, well, come on, she was a cheat, surely you could see she's a cheat. Apart from Martin Robbins, he's the one skeptic who understands the incredible blunder that these skeptics have made. There's a monumental fail on their part. But all the others are just going, well, come on, you've got to understand she's a cheat. Now, you've got to understand she's a cheat because, I mean, imagine you're in court trying to prove that Sally Morgan is a cheat and you've got no evidence against her. What are you going to say? Well, on the balance of probability, she's probably cheating. You know, I've used Occam's razor and I conclude that she's cheating, you know. It's what's more likely, that she's talking to people from the dead or that she's got a radio earpiece in her ear, so therefore I conclude she's cheating. Case dismissed. You need evidence if you're going to do something like that, and the skeptics don't know what evidence is. And I mean, these sort of like exercises of imagination are not confined to very, very serious issues like this. You'll probably get something like this in your face at some point. For instance, if you start talking about the Loch Ness Monster, and say you saw a Loch Ness Monster, and they'll say, well, no, you can't have done. There must have been a clown who was who's having a day off from the circus on the other side of the Loch Ness who was doing this. And they'll say, well, how do you know? And they'll say, well, which is more likely? That there's a monster lying under the water, just underneath the surface of Loch Ness, and no one knows about it? Or some clown was having a day off from the circus and decided to pull a trick? The thing is, what clown? There's no clown. He doesn't know about any clown, he's making it up. So therefore, a lot of what skeptics do has got nothing to do with evidence, or even the possibility of evidence. It's using their reasoning, then debunking simply becomes a feat of the imagination. If you can just conjure up in your head something, anything, that can potentially disprove the claim that's being made, then you win by default, because the other person, in a sense, is saying, well, it could be that, it's more likely to be that. So this is why this is such nonsense. Now, this is very, very interesting indeed. Following what Sheldrake was saying, what I've said before about the $1 Million Challenge, last year James Randi was sued. And again, he hasn't said a word about this. There's not been a single mention of this on his website. He hasn't referred to it once. But George Simpson, I mean, this is this guy here, Mr. George Simpson. He sued James Randi because he was an applicant for the $1 Million Challenge. Now, the only time I've ever seen skeptics referring to this is on the Centre for Inquiry forum, where they're talking about this and they're expressing sympathy for James Randi because he didn't. Well, basically, this guy applied for the $1 Million Challenge and he didn't get it, so they're expressing sympathy for James Randi. But if you read through the court papers, that's not what's actually been said. And I've actually got a PDF of the entire lawsuit on the folder. So if you want to have a look at it, it'll be, you know, maybe you can look at one of these guys' computers or write to me and I'll send it to you. But the whole thing is available. Is that the girl I met in the pub earlier? Tell her I'll call her back. So basically, what the point is that this is another thing the CFI people don't understand. What happened with George Simpson is he did have a case because he was accepted for the $1 Million Challenge, and the JRF wrongfully terminated his challenge. That's the point. It doesn't matter whether it's fair or not, or whether the skeptics think he had a case or not. The fact of the matter is, Randi initially accepted him and then just stopped writing to him and answering his emails. Now, what happened here is I'm not sure, but I did think with the JRF, I didn't understand that the $1 Million Challenge is not legally watertight at all. And as Sheldrick was explaining, there's a lot of other holes in it. Now, what happened here is I'm not exactly sure how this ended, but I know that Randi's solicitors filed a motion to dismiss, and it was overruled, and then everything goes very quiet. And that can mean only one thing: they settled out of court. They agreed probably to pay Mr. Simpson a certain amount of the fee and condition for Mr. Simpson dropping the case. And we've heard not another word about it since. All I'd like to say, if James Randi's $1 Million Challenge is the last word in paranormal investigation, why didn't he fight this case? Why didn't he fight the case, and why don't we hear about it all over the skeptic media? You should have heard about it everywhere. It should have been all over the place. Now, that building there is very, very interesting. This is 2941 Fairview Park Drive, Falls Church, Virginia, USA. Now, this is a building owned by someone called Richard Adams. And several organisations are actually housed there. Their offices are housed there. One of them is General Dynamics, which is a military-industrial complex, a company from the military-industrial complex. There's several classified operations going on there relating to the Science Applications International Corporation, which I think Andrew Johnson's mentioned, and also General Dynamics, which is another, General Dynamics, and DARPA, the Defence Advanced Research Project Agency. Richard Adams has actually worked for all of those organisations, or at least there's proof that he worked for DARPA, I think, and he's been connected with the others as well. He's one of the pioneers of the internet, and it's very, very interesting because this is also another organisation housed there, is the James Randi Educational Foundation. And Christopher Bolin, the researcher, has found documented proof that Richard Adams has been funding it. He's been funding this guy who worked for DARPA and SAIC, which is connected with 9/11, has been funding the JRF. And a large proportion of the funds for this $1 Million Challenge come from Richard Adams. And actually to this day, because Randi's retired, he's 87 years old, so he retired. Richard Adams is now listed as one of the directors of the James Randi Education Foundation. So that's, I think, is a very, very interesting connection there, especially since Randi, of course, like all skeptics, opposes conspiracy theories, and he's got an entire section on his web forum about 9/11, and an administrator appointed specifically. He's almost like the 9/11 officer of the JRF, and he is appointed specifically to run that forum, which promotes the official story. And if you go on there and try and promote the alternative views, they'll descend on you, and they won't just, like I say, they won't just try and dispute with you. They won't try and argue with you. They'll give you the sneers and the other things. The other fallacies that I listed at the front, they'll do that to you. I know because I've been on skeptic forums and they've done that to me. And I believe possibly other elements of the paranormal, conspiratorial, UFO, spiritual world are also being monitored very carefully by organisations like Richard Adams's. And I'll come onto that more in a minute. Randi's also, his name also appears on the list of officers for what's called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and that's a very sinister and troubling organisation. And I'll say more about that later when I bring back Paul Kurtz and the connections there. Now, there was some trouble also last year with Randi. Randi actually was, stated that he was closing one of his offices. I mean, it seems that the JRF was radically downsized, all in one go last year. And again, no one found out about this until the day it was effected, because skeptics, of course, do not talk about problems. They put up a front, and so when these problems come to bite them on the bottom, it happens very quickly, very suddenly. The JRF forum I mentioned before suddenly disaffiliated. It's now called the International Skeptics Forum. And Brian Dunning, who's another major skeptic, he was jailed for fraud. So it seems a lot of strange things happened at the same time. And the skeptics themselves were a bit thrown by all this, and they began speculating on what's going to happen to the JRF. Is that the end for it? And because the JRF hosts an annual conference called the Amazing Meeting, and I went to one of them actually because they had two in London, and I went to one of them. It was very interesting. But what has been speculated is that there's another guy called Michael Shermer, who the skeptics say, well, he'll eventually take over the Amazing Meeting, because Randi will one day, he'll die. He's an old man, he's 87, he's not going to be long until he dies. When he does, Shermer will take over everything. Now there's only one problem, and that's Michael Shermer himself. Michael Shermer is another of these prominent skeptics, the rock stars as they're called. And he became a skeptic after he had a mystical experience. Is that about nearly an hour now? I'll just go through this segment, okay, then we'll break. He had a mystical experience when he was out on a cycle race. He used to be a bike racer. And unlike some people, he had this mystical experience, and he immediately decided it was something materialistic, and he became a skeptic. And he studied psychology and things like that. And he set up the Skeptic Society in 1992, and he came out with a magazine called The Skeptic, and it's sort of like a rival to the Skeptical Inquirer, although there's a lot of crossover between the two. Several people write for both magazines and things like that. Richard Dawkins, James Randi, these other guys, they all write for this magazine. But something very interesting happened to Michael Shermer last year. Now, as far as being a skeptic goes, there are people who become skeptics, who converts to skepticism, and they pass people on the road going the other way. So the skeptic movement makes converts, and some skeptics they join our side. But that's not happened to one of the rock stars yet. But it might be about to, because Michael Shermer got married last year, and his wife is called Jennifer. She came from Germany, and she moved over to the United States to be married to him, and she brought all her belongings with her. One of those was a small portable radio, a 1970s Philips transistor radio, which didn't work, but she kept it because it belonged to her father, who died when she was 12 years old. She'd been brought up by her mother and her grandparents because her father died. And she was very, very sad, and she wished that her father was there to give her away at the wedding. And she brought this radio with her, and Shermer took good care of it. He tried to get it to work, he couldn't get it to work. He put it in his desk drawer in his study and left it there. She's not going to throw it away because of the sentimental value. The thing is, during the wedding, now in America you can get married at home, and Shermer did get married in a humanist ceremony in his own home, downstairs in the lounge. Halfway through the wedding, you hear music, and he looks around thinking, oh God, someone's left their damn mobile phone on. Nobody had. So where's this music coming from? He's listening, he follows it, he goes up the stairs to his study, and up to his desk, into the drawer. There's music coming from that radio. At the very moment when they're saying the vows in the middle of this wedding service, when his wife was thinking about her father at the time. The song that is being played is actually one that her father particularly liked as well. And Shermer is this great skeptic rock star, said this. I just witnessed an event so mysterious that it shook my skepticism. I have to admit, it rocked me back on my heels and shook my skepticism to its core. The emotional interpretations of such anomalous events grant them significance regardless of their causal account. And if we are to take seriously the scientific credo to keep an open mind and remain agnostic when the evidence is indecisive, or the riddle unsolved, we should not shut the doors of perception when they may be opened to us to marvel in the mysterious. What an extraordinary thing for a skeptic to say. It's just amazing. On the forums they were saying, oh my, of course the skeptics on the forums around the skeptosphere, he's lost his mind, he's gone crazy, he's going to become a damn woo-woo. So I was very, very curious to know where this would go. Now, I know that when people have a change of mind about something very fundamental to their worldview, it very, very rarely happens all at once. The road to Damascus, bolt of lightning thing, it hardly ever happens. It's a slow process where people gradually move into another frame of mind, and it takes time. So I kept my eye on Michael Shermer's website. Now, he has a website, michaelshermer.com, he doesn't do much with it. But he did, he posts links to his articles in the Scientific American, he has a column there. And so I was looking at the articles he'd written since he had that experience, and there was Science versus Pseudoscience was one title. Believing the weird and strange, and it was dismaying actually, because it looked to me like he basically picked himself up, brushed himself off, and carried on walking down Skeptic Avenue without breaking his stride. But you never know. You never know what might happen, because he may be on the back burner of his mind. He may come back to him, and he may eventually start looking in another direction. And I wish him luck. I do, and I'll do what I can to protect him, because the skeptics will not take kindly to such a high-level defection if he does come over to our side, and they will make his life hell. I'll say more about that later, but I mean, there is a thug element to the skeptic movement. It is absolutely brutal, criminally violent, I would say. But I think we're going to take a little break now. We'll carry on with our Skeptics Rogues Gallery in a short while. So, drink and serve. Thank you.
Decaf or orange? Just orange. I don't know why there's. Sorry, I mean, I might have made a mistake with the labeling, but I know where they are from the different audio files. I'll just switch this off here. Right. Do you want to just drop the mats on top?
Right, there's a birthday tonight. Happy birthday, Peter. We're not going to sing, but happy birthday anyway. Right, part 2, Ben. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right, let us continue with this little rogues gallery of skeptics, shall we? Now this is Dr. Susan Blackmore, and she is rent-a-skeptic, and that's a term she invented, because basically she was the Miss Media skeptic, doing the same job basically as Professor Chris French has been doing. Although she sort of like dropped out of that and kind of left a niche in the market for Professor Chris French. I don't think they actually decided that he would take over. It sort of evolved naturally in that sense. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Susan Blackmore is she's similar to Michael Shermer in that in 1970 she had a mystical experience. She was at St Hilda's College in Oxford, at university, and she was partying, as students do, and she took some drugs. She didn't specify what kind of drug it was, but it gave her a voyage to trip out city, basically. And it was so powerful, and she was convinced it was real. And so she decided she dropped the study course she was on, and she went into parapsychology. She was determined to prove scientifically the reality of psychic phenomena. Now, she changed from a believer into a skeptic. And she became a very ardent skeptic, actually, and became, like I said, a celebrity media skeptic, and she built a very successful second career doing that. And what's strange about this lady, she became a bit of a bête noire. She was hated by people who believe in UFO conspiracy, paranormal, spiritual matters, because she'd always be wheeled out on every TV show where you had an astrologer or a ufologist or a ghost hunter to put the skeptic side of the issue across, or maybe even hairdressing, I don't know, maybe she's... But I found out something very unusual about her, and I found it out because she told us. What happened was, she was at the amazing meeting I told you about earlier, Randi's conference, the one in London. She was one of the speakers. And she appeared on stage. This was not filmed and not recorded.
but I was in the audience and I heard her say it. She began weeping. She was really, really sad as she related the story. And what she said was that in 1979 she had come across the work of Dr. Carl Sargent, who was a psychic investigator in Cambridge. And his work was so promising that she said, let me come and supervise you. Let me come to Cambridge, I'll supervise you in your laboratory. Please, get me involved in this. And he agreed. So she hot-tailed it up to the other place, and she went into his laboratory and worked with him, supervising his work. And she unfortunately came to the conclusion that Carl Sargent was cheating. He was committing scientific fraud to achieve the results he got. When she published this, she was severely reprimanded by the head of her organisation, by her own supervisor, and she was basically admonished and told that was an awful thing to do. How could you accuse Dr. Carl Sargent this way? Carl Sargent was not questioned at all about his conduct. Now, she was weeping, she was crying on stage, Susan Blackmore, as she was telling the story. And so I can't help wondering, now, I don't want to play amateur psychologist too much, okay, but if you'll indulge me, there's nothing I hate more than an amateur psychologist, except perhaps a professional one. But if you will indulge me, I can't help wondering if perhaps she has an axe to grind. And perhaps whether she knows, whether it was conscious or not, whether it was subconscious or not, whether she knows it or not, that her experience, this very, very traumatic experience she had working with Dr. Carl Sargent, was a part of her conversion from believer into skeptic. Based on the way it has affected her, even after this was in 2012 I went to this conference, and it still brings tears to her eyes after all these years. Dr. Carl Sargent himself was never ever, no one ever else accused him, and today he's actually left science now, and today he designs computer games. So if he was indeed cheating, he got away with it. Now here's Richard Wiseman. Now he's going to come up later because I've met this guy and spoken to him. He's a likeable chap and funny, bit of a comedian. He boasts that he knows all these fake psychics who are working the psychics at the spiritualist churches and said that he doesn't name them, of course, so we've got to just take his word for it. So, he despite his playful, boyish exterior, I think there's maybe something going on underneath which I find a bit sinister. Now, Richard Dawkins is a pivotal figure in the skeptic movement because he has provided a link between secular atheism, like political atheism, and the skeptic movement. Now, the skeptic movement, as I said, is an ideological movement which debunks and tries to prove wrong UFO conspiracy, paranormal, spiritual matters. The atheist movement is different. The political atheist movement, secularism, is an organised political movement for people who don't believe in God. So it doesn't matter, in the sense all they do is they're just atheists, and they've got together to form an organisation. In Britain we have the British Humanist Association, the British Secular Society, etc. In America there's the American Humanist Association, and things like that. Now Richard Dawkins represents a bridge between the two, and it's a bridge which has now which has made the two movements almost blend into one. And Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion, a very, very famous book. And he attends skeptic conferences. He went on to become, after his promotion of secular atheism, political atheism, he started making videos and writing about skeptic matters to do. So he started addressing things such as conspiracy theories, UFOs, paranormal, spiritual matters. So in a sense he went from one to the other. So he's a very important figure in this story. He's going to come up later on because I think that the humanist secular movement is itself has been subverted. And I'll talk about that a bit later. So we'll continue with our little Rose Gallery of Skeptics. That there is the emblem of the British Humanist Association, you see. For the one life we have is their slogan. MBA. MBA. Richly deserved, I think, yeah. Mr. Copson.
He's on tonight.
You're in the right place, miss. I'm very pleased, I'm very proud that I have upstaged this morning and come here. Last, and definitely least, in this list of skeptic celebrities, It's Professor Brian Cox! Yes, a star is born! Oh yeah, this guy he's a nobody till 2005. He is a particle physicist at CERN, yes, the Large Hadron Collider, yes, the big thing in Switzerland with the 666 on it and portals to other dimensions and Satan coming up the pit, yeah. And I'm not going to go there because I could talk for an hour about that. But basically, he's involved with that project and God, thereby hangs a tale, I'll tell you. So you may be looking upon the face of the beast, 666. That could be him, you know, the man who unleashes the apocalypse. Anyway, in 2005, this chap was he was featured in a BBC Horizon documentary on Albert Einstein, and well, opportunity knocked, and a star was born, and they decided he had the right stuff to become a celebrity pop scientist, and he became that, and he is someone who's continuously making TV programs about science. And David Attenborough, the guy who made Life on Earth and The Living Planet, has named Professor Brian Cox as his successor, which is amazing because Cox is a physicist, not a biologist, but he made a program called The Wonders of Life, which is this is a Attenborough type documentary. Attenborough's getting too old to do that sort of thing now, but like I said, he's as an individual, he's very unpleasant. He's arrogant. He's rude. He's rude to people like us. I mean, there's no bones about it. He doesn't do this. He doesn't want to debate or treat us as people he can try and prove wrong. He just calls us names. That's his attitude. He's very, very unpleasant indeed. A very, very not a likeable man. And his wife actually is a more interesting character than he is in many ways. She's certainly more likeable. She's not saying much. But her name's Gia Milinovich. Now she works in TV and things like that. Now she has interesting connections. She's a feminist, and she has interesting connections to several fifth column organisations, like the Lifeboat Foundation. And I can't help wonder. I mean, if I was a conspiracy theorist now, well, let's just say my conspiradar is going haywire here. I can't prove anything, but maybe could she be his handler? Very often it's the wife, isn't it? So, right. So now we're going to discuss the skeptocracy. The skeptocracy. Rule by skepticism. Now, of course, skeptics will deny that they rule anyone because they believe in free speech, freedom of thought, human rights. This is Simon Singh. Now, he is a science journalist who has a column in The Guardian, and it's funny, all these big skeptics have seen their columns in The Guardian. It's like, you can't be a real proper celebrity skeptic unless you have a column in The Guardian. In this guy's column in The Guardian, he said that chiropractism, I don't know how many of you have had chiropractors on your back. My dad has as well. It works. I mean, he does a good job. He does a good job. But this guy said that chiropractic was bogus. And the British Chiropractic Association sued him. Now, there was a lot of fuss about this, and quite rightly, I think, because although I actually disagree with him, I do believe that it was wrong for the BCA to sue him. In fact, it was a quite nasty thing to do, because I actually, when I say I believe in free speech, I believe in free speech for everybody, even people who disagree with me. So I supported Simon Singh. I actually went along to a meeting, and there's a TV show where you can actually see me in the audience. I went along to a meeting held by a group of skeptics who wanted to support Simon Singh. A solicitor called David Alan Green took his case up, and luckily he did manage to get the case dismissed, and the lawsuit did not succeed. But he went through a couple of years of real worry and concern that these people had sued him. So, well, there you are. So you see, skeptics, they sometimes come under attack, and not just in this country, but I mean, for instance, in some theocratic regimes like in the Middle East or in some parts of America where there's a lot of Christians, to be a skeptic is actually quite, at best, it makes you a bit of a social outcast. It can be outright dangerous in some countries. So now I, of course, find that appalling. I hate the thought that the skeptic was harmed in any way because they're a skeptic. I believe that skeptics should be, the way I deal with skeptics is like I have tonight, talking about them and proving them wrong, explaining why they're wrong, just like Robert McLuhan does. I would never use the law or force to silence a skeptic, I absolutely promise that. And as for the skeptics themselves, who believe in human rights, free thinking, free speech, what's their attitude towards us? Do they regard us? Would they treat us with the same amount of generosity as I have with them? Well, unfortunately not. When the skeptics switch from the defence to the prosecution benches, their attitude changes very much. John, could we play the Daybreak TV clip, please? Thanks. This is Professor Richard Wiseman, who I talked about earlier on.
The Daybreak one, yeah?
Yeah.
The country's leading psychologist has accused most psychics of being manipulative charlatans.
Professor Richard Wiseman has also called for them to be regulated by law. He joins us now live from Glasgow. Good morning, Richard. And what exactly are your concerns then?
Well, the situation is fairly terrible. We have around about 12% of the population going to see a psychic with a fairly serious issue in their lives, like a career change or a relationship issue, and they have no idea about the sort of psychological mind games that the psychics use in order to convince them they know all about them, and that isn't the case. And also, the psychics are completely unregulated. So it's not as if you're sitting against a sort of counsellor who's gone through some sort of training. You could be up against somebody who just doesn't know what they're doing at all. So it's a fairly bad situation.
Are you sure you're not just jealous because you can't see into the future yourself?
I wish I could, but like most psychics, I can't. And so in the new book, Paranormality, what I do is talk about all the various mind games that they use in order to convince the people that they really can do that. So, for example, mediums will say, oh, I'm getting an impression that a D is a Dominic or a Derek, and you've got to do the work in order to actually match that. And if you can't, they'll say things like, oh, I'll leave that one with you, ask around members of your family. So you're doing the work for them, but people don't realise it, and it's why the book has caused such controversy, I think.
Yes. Well, this book, you say you can appear to be a psychic in 6 easy steps. Just talk us briefly through them.
Well, I've spoken about the very vague statements there and the notion of outs, you know, where you have to do the work for them. There's also a lot of flattery that goes on. So, for example, the psychic will look at the tarot cards and say, oh, I can see you've got a lot of untapped creative potential, because we all like to believe that about ourselves. There's also the notion of a double-headed statement. You know, I get the impression that sometimes you enjoy going to parties, other times you're far more reserved, you want to sit at home with a book. And of course that's true of everyone at some point in their lives. So it's very important. I mean, if you went to buy a second-hand car, you take somebody with you who knew about cars, exactly the same as psychics. You need to know what you're getting into.
But if it brings comfort, is it really doing any harm? What's the problem?
Well, I think the problem is we just don't know whether it brings any comfort or not. I mean, unlike a normal counsellor who will give you the tools to solve, hopefully, the problem you've got right now and problems in the future, psychics don't do that. They give you straight advice. They say, this is what you should do, and if you have a problem in the future, you have to go back to them again, so people become reliant. And also with a medium, I mean, part of bereavement therapy is moving on in your life. The mediums are saying, no, this person is still in spirit, and it can keep you trapped essentially in the past. So we don't know these people are bringing comfort. It's quite possible they're actually not helping their clients at all.
But have you ever met anybody who's given you cause to doubt, think, blimey, I think this fella can see into the future a bit? Has that ever happened to you?
You know, I would love to find somebody like that, but I've tested lots of psychics over the sort of 20 years or so that I've been researching this, and it's always the same. The anecdotal evidence is very strong. All their believers say, oh my goodness, you've got to test this person, they really are the real deal, and as soon as you get them into the lab, you do a properly controlled test, suddenly that claim crumbles. And so the call really today is to say, look, people need to know what they're getting into. Obviously they can go along to a psychic or a medium, that's up to them, but at least find out the other side of the story, because often that isn't out there in the newspapers or on television.
We can hear on this programme.
Often the media are very pro, telling people this stuff is true, when actually there is another side to the story.
Okay, we talk to you later.
Well, thanks, Richard.
What a terrible interview. Not only did they not bring on somebody else to actually challenge the points he makes here, but the actual interviewers didn't even address this point, this crucial point. And this is going on elsewhere. I mean, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA, this news story came out. Fortune telling no longer on the cards in Philly. The city closes psychics, astrologers and tarot readers. They never saw it coming. City inspectors shut down more than a dozen psychics, astrologers and tarot card readers after learning about a decades-old Pennsylvania law that bans fortune-telling for profit. They didn't make or arrest anyone. They didn't make any fines or arrest anyone, but they will if these people try to return to work. The inspectors have closed 16 shops since Tuesday, and more are expected to close. I brought this up on the Skeptic Forum, and they were 100% behind this action by the authorities. Free speech, free thought, human rights, but only if you're a skeptic. The skeptocracy, indeed. And this is the newspaper article I was telling you about. It's from a few years ago. Now this here is David Tredinnick MP, and that's not his usual dress. As you see, this is a Photoshop job. But David Tredinnick, he was on the Health Select Committee and Science and Technology Select Committee, and skeptics began calling for his forced deselection. Forced deselection. Something similar happened in America. Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore, she tried to introduce the Simoncini cancer treatment into the state of Nevada, and skeptics in America called for her forced deselection, even though she was an elected member of Parliament of the Nevada legislature, the same way that David Tredinnick is elected to the UK Parliament. So they're basically saying, the skeptics are basically saying that if elected representatives who have been elected fair and square by the people to represent them, say anything that contradicts what skeptics believe to be true, they should be removed from office. An MP removed from office by forced deselection, which is essentially a coup d'etat for not being a skeptic. Now I'm just going to give you an example of the skeptic attitude. I'm now going to show you a transcript of a conversation I had on the Hapanwo forum, which is a forum I run, with a member who is a skeptic, a member called Beatsart, he's gone now, but he's a skeptic member of my forum. I'm not going to read out the words verbatim, you can read for yourself exactly what, this is the attitude they have. The thread is called Astrological Twat-Faced Tory. And as you see here, he says, I won't read it out word for word, but he says, get out of government. Get out of government for not being a skeptic. This calls, you can't just remove someone from office who's an elected official because you don't agree with them. But you can, if you're a skeptic, you can call for it. They do call for it, they expect to be taken seriously. And this guy is completely and utterly, as you can see here, very aggressively and angrily opposed to the idea. And he doesn't make the points I make there. If you want to get out of government, you're going to have to persuade his constituents not to vote for it. That's the way politics works. It's supposed to work in a free country. But the skeptics don't want a free country. They want a skeptocracy. Free speech, free thought, human rights, but only if you're a skeptic. Tedgate, right. Rupert Sheldrake, we've already discussed him once, we're going to discuss him again. That below is Graham Hancock. Now TED, Technology, Entertainment, Design, they hold conferences where they bring people in to speak for just 15 minutes on stage, and there's a self-organised affiliate groups called TEDx, which are not directly controlled, but self-organised, that share the same constitution. TEDx Whitechapel decided to host these two guys. Rupert Sheldrake, of course, is a spiritual researcher, a proper scientist, qualified, who deals with the scientific method. Graham Hancock there studies ancient mysteries and alternative archaeology, and also the nature of consciousness and mind, and psychedelics, things like that. The event went down very well at TEDx Whitechapel. The audience clapped at the end, because you can now see the videos online. The videos were uploaded to the TEDx official YouTube channel. Shortly after that, they were removed. And TEDx said this. They put this up on their website. After due diligence, including a survey of published scientific research and recommendation from our science board and our community, we have decided that Graham Hancock's and Rupert Sheldrake's talks from TEDx Whitechapel should be removed from distribution on TEDx's YouTube channel. We're not censoring the talks. Instead, we're placing them on another channel, TED Controversies, where they can be framed and highlight both their provocative ideas and the factual problems in their arguments. All talks on the TEDx talks channel represent the opinion of the speaker, not TED or TEDx, but we feel a responsibility not to provide a platform for talks which appear to have crossed the line into pseudoscience. Well, TED Controversies is actually like what Rupert Sheldrake describes as the naughty corner. Now, and it receives a fraction of the views of the main TED and TEDx YouTube channels. What's happened there is basically the TEDx organisers have succumbed to pressure from the skeptic equivalent of disgusted Tunbridge Wells. That's it. Loads of skeptics wrote in and said, I don't like these men appearing at TEDx events. I want you to remove them because I don't agree with them. And what's more, Rupert Sheldrake, incidentally, the year afterwards, he was at the International Conference on Science and Consciousness at Santa Fe, New Mexico, USA. He was attacked by a man wielding a knife and severely injured. This man tried to kill him. Free thought, free speech, human rights, but only if you're a skeptic. It gets worse. This is a statue in Brazil of a famous spiritual researcher and author called Chico Xavier. Now, he wrote lots of books about spiritualism, and he was a psychic medium himself. This was desecrated. It was people sprayed paint all over it. Something that they hit it with a hammer and tried to break it. This was his memorial. At the same time, a very famous psychic medium on TV, the equivalent of Sally Morgan, or what's his name, Derek Acora, people like that. This person was kidnapped and was found dead, murdered, with their hands tied behind their backs. Now, this was actually blamed on Christian evangelicals. So this, let me just stress, this is not skeptics doing these crimes, but the skeptics were silent about it. They didn't care. Skeptics supported the what happened was, in 2008, the Fraudulent Mediums Act of 1951 was repealed, and the skeptics were absolutely horrified by it, and they immediately demanded alternative legislation. The Fraudulent Mediums Act made it very, very difficult for spiritualists all through the 20th century, because it was replaced with the Witchcraft Act before that, and the Vagrancy Act were used before that. Basically, these are used to prevent spiritualists organising and holding events in their own premises by themselves. The skeptics want to shut this down. So it's human rights, free speech, free thinking, but only if you're a skeptic. So that is the true face of the skeptic movement. I supported Simon Singh because I believed his freedom was being infringed, because as a skeptic he wanted to express a skeptical opinion. I'm not a skeptic. If I want to express a non-skeptical opinion and I get in trouble for it, the skeptics will not see me in the same light. Right, medical skeptics, right. Now, again, medical skeptics, there's a lot of crossover between the two, but there are some skeptics who specialise in the medical fields. And they use the same slogans as the other skeptics. We're into education, science, free speech. This is Dr. Ben Goldacre, and he is a very interesting guy because he's kind of the medical skeptic equivalent of Professor Brian Cox. He's almost as obnoxious, I must say. And he's got an interesting background. He's the son of Michael John Goldacre, who was a research scientist who helped develop vaccines, including, I believe, someone told me he was involved in the measles, mumps, rubella, MMR vaccine. His mother was called Nusha Fox, who was the lead singer of a band called Fox. So he grew up in a family associated with the media and science. So he's the perfect person to be a poster boy for the establishment when it comes to medical skepticism. And he's young, good-looking. Well, some people think so anyway. He's got eloquence, he's poised, he's sophisticated, and he's the kind of person who would be made into one of these skeptic heroes. And to be honest, I mean, I have supported some of the things he's done because he backs up Simon Singh as well. He was at that meeting I told you about where I attended. And he's also done something similar in South Africa for a medical skeptic there called Zaki Akmat, who wants to treat people with AIDS with antiretroviral drugs, and the government are not providing it for some of the poor people there. And he's campaigning against it. Zaki Akmat was attacked by a guy I probably agree with more, a guy called Dr. Matthias Rath, and was sued. Rath ended up suing Goldacre. And again, I'm against the suppression of free speech. When whoever it is, I don't care. It doesn't matter who they are. The guy on the right there is Dr. Andrew Wakefield, or as he's known today, Andrew Wakefield. He's no longer called doctor. He had his medical title stripped from him, and he cannot practice medicine in this country. He's now gone abroad, he's living in America. And he's recently brought out a film called Vaxxed, which was bravely shown at the Tribeca Film Festival, which is organised by the actor Robert De Niro, who has an autistic son, and believes that possibly the son became autistic because of the MMR vaccine. Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a paper in the Lancet, a medical journal, stating that he was concerned that the MMR vaccine might be linked to cases of autism. The result was that this guy on the left, Brian Deere, who was a medical journalist, hounded him, together with other people, including Goldacre, and attacked him, and eventually got him ruined, erased, as Brian Deere actually says himself. Hissing man, erased him. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'll give another example of this too. These people are slaves crucified on the road to Rome, to warn the others to behave themselves. The good news is the truth is coming out now, I think, but I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. But this is the emblem of the Stop the AVN. Now, the AVN is the Australian Vaccination Network. This was run by someone called Merrill Dorey, who was subjected to the same treatment as Sally Morgan. The Merrill Dorey, the Australian Vaccination Network, warns against the dangers of vaccines and other treatments like that. Now, as I say, Merrill Dorey sent pictures of dismembered dead bodies, just like Sally Morgan, lots of other things as well. So I believe that the same thug element, the same group of thugs, skeptic thugs, attacked her just as they did Sally Morgan. But it goes further than that. I mean, the Merrill Dorey and her organisation wanted to host a tour of Australia by Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, who is a physician. She's a qualified doctor who has written about her own concerns about the dangers of vaccination. And the response from the Australian Vaccination Network was to picket the government and lobby the government so they cancelled the tour, so that people couldn't even hear the other side of the story. They call it false balance. They say, well, if you're going to do a program about human reproduction, you wouldn't bring in a stork theorist, would you? That's a completely false analogy. These people are not stork theorists. This Sherry Tenpenny is a doctor. She's an expert witness. She should be heard in the media. And certainly they shouldn't have these little thugs, these little Hitlers going around stopping people from speaking, blocking tours, preventing tours from happening. Free speech, free thought. Human rights, but only if you're a skeptic. This is Dr. Paul Offit, this atrocious little man. He's trying to make it law for everyone to have vaccines, especially children. He's American, he's been going to all the state legislatures, including Nevada, where the assemblywoman they're trying to kick her out. And he's just succeeded in California in getting it law for children who attend school to have the MMR vaccine, no matter what the parents want. He's been approaching the federal government to try and get them to step in and overrule the states and make law across the whole country for all children to be vaccinated. He's also poking his nose into other countries. He's been over to this country and holding meetings with John Cruddas MP. Good name, suits him. John Cruddas MP is calling for the parents of children who don't allow their children to have the MMR vaccine, to have their benefits stopped. And he succeeded. This has actually just been done in Australia. They brought in a no jab, no pay policy. And they say the vaccine is still voluntary. You just don't get your benefits if you don't have it. Now, if you're poor and you're dependent on benefits, it's not voluntary. It's an insult to pretend that it is. Free speech, free thoughts, human rights, but only if you're a skeptic. Now this is, I'm apologising if I mispronounce her name, Dr. Lucia Tomiljanovic. She's a Canadian physician who has thrown this whole thing into entirely new light. I've not seen the film Vax, but I think she appears in it. This lady used the Freedom of Information Act to get hold of government health committee in Canada, government health committee minutes of secret meetings held by various officials in the Canadian government, in the Department of Health. But from 1983, long before Wakefield published his paper, from 1983, they were discussing the potential dangers of the MMR vaccine. And they were saying how this has to be kept from the public. The public must not know about it. We're going to continue to use this vaccine, and we're going to put the public in danger, and we're not going to tell them about it. It's there in black and white.
In Canada, they infected 93 million people with a contaminated vaccine that had carcinogens.
That was the polio one, wasn't it?
I don't know which vaccine it was, I just remember.
That was
but they ended up having to admit it.
Yeah, that's it. It was done in America. Yeah, I've done that came into my zombie talk. I talk about that. Yeah, that's. It just goes to show, doesn't it? I mean, it's just so. The truth and what the skeptics think is real is so different, and the skeptics believe they are. They have the fast track to truth when they don't. They've got to step back, take a look in the mirror, and look at themselves. What if cannabis cured cancer? Right now, I was talking in the break with someone about this when we were discussing this. I know somebody. Who I can't mention her name, but she's a nurse. She's a domiciliary nurse in the NHS. She had a friend who had cancer. Had basically been given a terminal diagnosis. It was metastatic casualty for tumours, and was going to die. And this nurse treated this friend of hers with cannabis oil. Cannabis oil is she said, was very effective against the most aggressive cancers, and this woman had nothing to lose because the conventional treatment hadn't worked. The result of this, and this, I must stress that this nurse I know did it in her own time. She didn't do it on the Queen's shilling, she wasn't on duty, she did it in her own time. She was suspended from her work. She's a lady who's not far from retirement now. She's only a few years away from retirement. She was threatened with losing her pension as well as losing her job, and she was treated like a criminal. I'm glad to say that she has kept her job. She's on a final warning on condition she doesn't say anything about it. She's not going to say anything about it until after she's retired, and she's going to sing like a canary and you're going to know all about what happened. Her friend, who she treated with cannabis oil, who was told by the doctors, you're going to die, there's nothing you can do, is now in complete remission. How the skeptics will tell you again and again and again. Hello.
My sister had cancer, 3 lots on her lung.
Terminal.
Took cannabis oil, it's gone.
Exactly, yeah. And you see, well, I'm very glad. The skeptics, one thing the skeptics will say is, there's no conspiracy to suppress a cancer cure, or any of the other things skeptics talk about. If there was, people would speak out. Too many people would have to know about it. You can't keep conspiracies when people know about it. Yes, you can. If you know a little bit about human psychology, and you make people dependent, you make people's livelihood dependent on them keeping it a secret, they will tacitly collaborate with it, even if they don't even know it. Apart from a few brave souls, like my friend, who speak out about it. And they, like Dr. Andrew Wakefield, they try to crucify her on the road to Rome, just like Spartacus, to warn the other slaves not to rebel. Now, we're going to try and get inside the mind of a skeptic. I'm very sorry about that. It's not nice. And as I said, I mean, I'm curious about them. I've got friends who are skeptics. I don't bear skeptics ill will as individuals. But as a skeptic is ideologically repelled by the idea that the things we might believe in are real. It's not rational, it's ideological. They don't want them to be true. And they fool themselves that they're being rational. Now I'm going to play you a very extremely interesting segment from a radio show. This was in a radio show called Skeptics Guide to the Universe. It's episode 10, and it's towards the end of the show if you ever want to go to their website and listen to it yourself. So, John, it's the last one, thanks. This is fascinating. Just listen to this.
Other countries, leading psychologists has accused most...
Sorry.
It's all right. It's my fault, I didn't like it.
Other countries, leading psychologists has accused most
The same one twice there.
Yes.
Don't know what's going on there.
It's in there somewhere. It's in there somewhere.
Just going to have to escape out that one for a second. I lost it.
It's funny because you verified it. We played them, didn't we?
Yeah.
We played them. It's
it was. Oh, I think. I'm trying to.
Pretty good downstairs. So I guess. Pretty good downstairs. So I guess the goal then is to teach them to be critical thinkers and let religion take care of itself.
I think it would, but it's always a risk. I do. One secular humanist parent told me that they basically took the approach of what you just said, teach them to be critical thinkers, but basically say nothing about religion, and then their children will grow up and make up their own mind, which they're going to do anyway. And it turned out that his daughter became a Buddhist, and he was not happy about that. And he thought, in retrospect, that perhaps he made a mistake by leaving it so open-ended. I don't have the answer, I'm certainly not telling people what to do when it comes to that, but his conclusion was, if I had to do it over again, I would have indoctrinated her into non-belief, basically. I don't believe in strong indoctrination.
I would indoctrinate her into non-belief. That guy, Steve Novella, he's the presenter of that show, he uttered those words without even pausing. The implications of what he said, the contradiction in what he said, just completely went over his head. And none of the others picked up on it anyway. What you just heard is skeptical denial and ignorance of their own ideas. How do you indoctrinate someone into non-belief? He said, this friend of mine brought his daughter up to be a free thinker, rational, critically thinking, which is what skeptics say they are, do they not? It's in their own definition of themselves, apportioning evidence, etc., etc. But when this girl, this daughter of his, gave him the answer he didn't like, and became a Buddhist as a result of her critical thinking, he said, I made a mistake. I should have indoctrinated her into non-belief.
Referendum decision.
Yeah, This is just explosive, and this kind of statement it lights up the entire falsehood of the skeptic movement like a bolt of lightning. It's what he's effectively saying is that an ideology that can be rejected through critical thinking. In other words, rational, logical, scientific thought actually has to be suppressed in order to maintain the skeptical ideology. So he's essentially saying that he's admitting, although he doesn't realise it, that he has an ideology that needs to be defended. It needs to be defended by protecting it from rational, scientific, empirical, critical thought. Isn't that incredible? Now, there's another thing you've got to worry about. This is a skeptic. That guy on the left there is Steve Novella. He's the man you heard speaking there. This is actually a very interesting still from a movie, the Patterson-Gimlin film, made in 1967, which shows Bigfoot, and I think the evidence suggests that is a genuine film. Now, what you've got to be wary of when it comes to skeptics is the conveniently told confession story. CTCS, conveniently told confession story. Now, this refers to all paranormal, it refers to many things, especially paranormal investigation. Peter Knudsen, the Danish ufologist, has talked about this, about how some people, sometimes they can make it so people just drop a case and just run through a confession. Now what happens is, there's this mystery, there's a mystery surrounding some kind of paranormal phenomenon, okay? And then there's a lot of querying over it, the believers believe in it, the skeptics deny it. And then you get a confession. In the case of this film, Bob Gimlin, one of the photographers, he phoned up a guy at the BBC and he said, I faked this. This is a fake movie. I faked that there is actually my wife, and she's dressed in a furry suit. She's dressed in a gorilla outfit. We just got her to walk in front of the camera, and we filmed it. And the response from the skeptics is always the same. We have a confession. Someone's confessed. Case closed. Case closed. We don't even think about it or look at it again. We've got a confession that proves that the case is false. You put that down. You close that book. Switch that computer. We're not going to investigate this anymore. We have a confession. Case closed. End of story. But a confession is a claim as well, as much as anyone else's is. Now, a cryptozoologist called Paul Deller, he investigated this. He spoke to Bob Gimlin, and Bob Gimlin confirmed that he faked this thing with his wife. His wife died by then. And then he went to visit the location, and he did some analysis with the film and everything like that, and he worked out that that figure you see there is 6'7" tall. Is Bob Gimlin's wife 6'7" tall? So what Bob Gimlin did, what he believes is that Bob Gimlin made a fake confession. But the skeptics are not interested, because for skeptics there is no fake confession. The moment someone confesses, you just turn around, touch your nose 3 times, and say, "I faked it," and that's the end. They don't want to know. This is another example. This is a book written by Kevin and Alex Malarkey. Now, Kevin is the father, Alex is his son. And it's called The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. It's about a near-death experience. And again, this book was a bestseller. Talking about this was a boy who was he was 6 years old. He was badly injured in a car accident. He suffered brain and spinal injuries. He was in a coma for a couple of months. The doctors thought he would die. He made a recovery just against all the odds, and he's now learning to walk and talk again. Slowly but surely, he's getting better. But when he learned to talk again, he told this story about his near-death experience into this book. Well, again, in the very same programme I played a clip from, Skeptics Who into the Universe, they talked about this, and they talked about how Alex Malarkey confessed to faking this whole thing. He made it all up, he said. And again, case closed. We have a confession, that's the end of it. We don't want to know anymore. A confession cannot be falsified. But I think there's good reason to think that this confession is falsified. As is the case with these 2 ladies. These are the Fox sisters. Kate and Margaret Fox, in 1848, I believe, had played a trick, they say, which led to the invention of spiritualism. Now, this wasn't when spiritualism started, but this is when the skeptics say it started, so it must be true. The fact of the matter is, though, they later confessed that they faked the whole thing. The skeptics say, well, by then the ball was rolling and we had spiritualist churches everywhere. But it was all a lie, because they confessed that they faked it. But we have reason to believe that these 2 ladies actually, the confession they made was false. It was because once they became famous, they actually found it quite difficult to deal with. The attention, the lack of privacy, the problems it caused for their families, for their marriages, their husbands left them, things like that. They developed drink problems. Those 2 girls, they decided, well, look, can we just roll this back? Let's just say we faked it, and maybe we can get out of this nightmare. And Robert McLuhan, actually, in this book, has talked about that, and about how the whole fake confession, the whole confession thing is probably not real, but the skeptics have accepted it as real because it was made. The confession was given, so therefore it must be real. As with Alex Malarkey, the author of this book, he probably also, there's reason to question his confession too. Because the thing is, he had an awful lot of problems after he brought this book out with fame. He became very famous, and he was troubled. I mean, he was a disabled kid living in a home, and fans of the book would come and visit him. They'd knock on his door, and his mother got fed up with it, and his father got fed up with it, and he got fed up with it. And there was also his parents split up, and there was a lot of fuss over where the royalties of the book should go. As there was a lawsuit. I think the mother sued the other 2. I don't know. So again, there's a reason why someone would confess to faking something without it necessarily being true. So don't be taken in by the conveniently told confession story. It might not be so real after all, and maybe it's not a confession. Now, this is the bit you've all been waiting for. Skeptics who might be being paid by the government or used by the government to spread disinformation. Now, Richard D. Hall has talked about this in detail. I don't have all the answers to this, neither does he. It can't be proven. But this is actually a very interesting case. Now, apart from James Randi, the people I've described, the various skeptics I've talked about, there's no actual evidence that they are being paid by the government, disinformation agents, getting backhanders to spread lies. There's no evidence, apart from the case of Randi and his connection to Rick Adams and things like that. But if people are willing to do it for nothing, the government aren't going to pay them, are they? Useful idiots are far more effective because they can't swap benches, they can't blow the whistle, they can talk complete nonsense and be 100% sincere. Now, this lady here is... Now, like I say, Richard D. Hall has talked about this. I don't know if it's true or not. It can't be proven. But this is Jenny Randalls. This is Jenny Randalls, who is a ufologist and has written a couple of dozen books about UFOs. And she's changed her tune quite significantly over the UFO issue. And I'll give you an example from just 2 of her titles. This is a book she wrote in 1984, Sky Crash, A Cosmic Conspiracy, co-written with Dot Street and Brenda Butler. Now, come forward to 2000, and this is what she's written. UFOs That Never Were. This is basically a book about solved cases. And writing a book's a lot of effort. I've done it myself. And she's sat down, she's written a book about UFO cases that turned out not to be aliens. And she's co-written, her co-authors are Andy Roberts and Dr. David Clark. And here they are, these two guys. Now, this gruesome twosome don't like me very much. In fact, they wrote in 14 Times that I'm a bit of a nutter. So, well, I've been called worse things, but they're not that keen on me, unfortunately. But that's an example of, is it possible that somehow Jenny Randles and, well, these two guys, whether they know it or not, are part of this agenda. And they're certainly being used to spread false information about UFOs. Definitely indeed. Now that there is a UFO. No, it's not. It's actually the Orford Ness Lighthouse. But believe it or not, when the Rendlesham Forest incident emerged, this all over the media, the guy called Dr. Ian Ridpath, an astronomer, came up with this cock and bull theory that this was the cause of all the commotion at the Bentwell's Woodbridge Base, this lighthouse. And it was lapped up by the media, and it was everywhere, it was all over the place. And again, I don't know, maybe he's telling the truth. I don't know, or maybe he's not telling the truth, but maybe he's being sincere, maybe he's saying what he believes is real, and his statement has simply been streamlined on its way to publicity, rather than it simply being made up. It's an interesting question.
I'd like to know how it made the burn damage and the imprints in the forest then.
Yeah, exactly. How did it burn Larry Warren's skin and things like that? Yes. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Now there's some signs going on in the skeptic movement that there's some trouble at the mill. All is not well with Shay Skeptic. Now, there's a guy called Steve Trueblue I've got to pay tribute to, because he's another skepticologist, just like Robert McLuhan, and he's said a lot about this. He's got a YouTube channel. This is a skeptic called Rebecca Watson, and she herself, it's a long, complicated story, but basically she herself was subjected to an attack, death threats. She received, first of all, she received death threats, threats to rape her, threats to mutilate and torture her, threats to plant a bomb in her house, threats to kill members of her family. She was called every name under the sun. And we wonder, well, where was this all coming from? Presumably there was some crazy, loony conspiracy theorists out there who didn't like what she was saying. And so they decided to give her a hard time. Well, actually, the police investigated, and they found out that these threats were coming from other skeptics. She was being attacked by other skeptics. And what's more, they sent her photos of dismembered bodies, which were the same photos that were sent to Meryl Dorey of the Australian Vaccination Network, and to Sally Morgan, psychic Sally Morgan, which means that this thug element, I believe, are the same people that are behind all these other attacks. But this is just an example of the kind of people we're dealing with. Susan Blackmore, who I showed you earlier, always said, well, when I believed in spiritual things, I never got hate mail from skeptics. But now I'm a skeptic, I'll get hate mail from believers. Well, times have changed, Susan. Now you can get hate mail from skeptics. I do too. Now, there's some suspicious element, there's some suspicious things going on with the skeptic movement as well, which makes me think that this is some more evidence, I think, that perhaps it is being used by government psychological operations. This is the logo for Atheism Plus. Now this actually, again, caused a lot of problems in the skeptic movement. Some of the skeptics actually, this actually woke some of them up. Not necessarily to the things we talk about, but at least to problems within their own movement. This is an organisation, this is this grew out of the American Humanist Association and Political Atheism and Secularism, the movements. You notice it's got a little Christian cross there, it's a bit ironic. But anyway, this is their mission statement. Atheism Plus is a safe space for people to discuss how religion affects everyone and to apply skepticism and critical thinking to everything, including social issues like sexism, racism, LGBT issues, politics, poverty and crime. Now, several skeptics were concerned because they tried to get involved with this organisation, and they were basically told, because they were white heterosexual males, they would have to take second place. They would be they say, well, you're going to have to take a second step to everyone else because you're a white heterosexual male. Now this is very sinister when this sort of thing happens. Again, Richard D. Hall has discussed this in more detail, but this is Yuri Bezmenov. Now he is a defector from the Soviet KGB, and he said that he has stated that the Soviet Union had a plan to destroy Western society by infiltrating it with their agents, which would be called change agents, which I think is a word used by Common Purpose, and they would be placed in various organisations, and the aim would be to break down society by destroying relationships between people, traditions, identity, and where this was the old Marxist idea of knocking down, breaking down society into a pile of rubble so it can be built up again in a new form. And he goes into detail about this. Now, of course, you might say, well, the Soviet Union is gone; it's destroyed. The Soviet socialist movement is gone, wiped out. Wow.
Can I just say the symbol that you saw before, the A+, the red symbol for the A, that's the NASA symbol.
Is it?
They used it for October.
Oh, that's interesting.
And when we're talking about Russians and NASA, they're all interlinked.
Yes, they are indeed. Yeah, that's the point. I mean, well, my question is perhaps could it be that the forces that control the Soviet Union at a higher level are still there, and perhaps they are also in control or attempting to take control of Western democratic capitalist powers, the so-called victors in the Cold War. There's a possibility. There's actually a generic word for everything that Bezmenov talks about. Richard D. Hall discusses Bezmenov's work. He doesn't use this term, but it's actually cultural Marxism. Now this is a long, complicated subject. It's very controversial as well. And well, I've lost some friends bringing this subject up, but I think I should talk about it because I think everyone needs to know about it. I think it affects everybody. But what is cultural Marxism? Well, I don't have time to go into detail here, but it is a form of psychological warfare. It's a form of mind control, and it's one of the most successful forms of mind control that the human species has ever been subjected to, except perhaps organised religion. This certainly is at least second to that. And you may think it doesn't affect me. I'm not affected by it. It doesn't affect me, doesn't it? Well, there's many examples I could give, but have you ever walked into a cafe, you've gone up to the counter and you've said, could I have a cup of black coffee, please? And then you suddenly go, oh, have I just said something racist? And especially if there's a black person behind the counter serving you, you might think, oh my God, I've insulted them, I've offended them. I've carried out a racially motivated hate crime against that person. Even if it's just for a moment. Has that ever happened to you? And the fact of the matter is, on a factual level, you have done absolutely nothing wrong. What you've done is you've asked for a black coffee. You've asked for a coffee with no milk in it. But because of this psychological warfare, it's actually getting to the point where people are having these thoughts and feelings. And that is very, very disturbing. It's very worrying that this has actually happened, that this is going on. And it seems to be in the skeptic movement now. And I think this goes back a long way. For instance, I talked earlier about CSICOP, CSICOP. That's actually it's an acronym for the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. But this was founded by a guy called Paul Kurtz, one of the founders of CSICOP. And he was also what is known as one of the signatories, as they're known. The signatories of the American Humanist Manifesto. Now this is, as I said, through Richard Dawkins, there's links between the political atheist and skeptic movements via people like Richard Dawkins, and by Paul Kurtz. Paul Kurtz signed the American Humanist Manifesto, but he was involved, and he was one of many people. And I mentioned that James Randi is on the board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which is connected to Paul Kurtz as well, and connected to another guy, a very sinister person called Dr. Vern Bullough. Now, Dr. Vern Bullough is a psychologist, and he's editor of the Journal of Social Sexual Studies. And he's involved with other people like Corus Lamont. I don't have time to go into details about this, but they've both been connected to a magazine, a journal that was published called Paedika, and Paedika is spelled P-A-E-D-I-K-A, as in paedophile. And Vern Bullough himself wrote a very, very sinister article called Children's Sexual Encounters with Adults. Yeah, that's what it was called. And the article actually, it doesn't actually go as far as to say it's okay, it's okay to have sex with children, but it hints that there's nothing wrong with it, and it's just normal, and it's just something that perhaps society needs to take on board, and things like that. It's extremely worrying and disturbing to read things like that, and to know that the people involved in these organisations have signed the American Humanist Manifesto, are members of the American Humanist Association, and also are connected to the PSYCOP. Today PSYCOP is called the CSI, Committee for Scientific Skeptical Investigation. PSYCOP is it's thought to be a joke because Psi is psychical power, psychical research. It's short for psychical research. So PSYCOP referred to maybe the policeman of psychological research, but that apparently was not intentional. So this is where the skeptic movement starts to sound sinister. And I would ask skeptics to actually think about this and think about what their organisation is, who's involved with it, and what the long-term agenda of this movement is. There has been a backlash within the skeptic movement of people I actually respect who are skeptics who have got wise to this. These are the people who turned up at the Atheism Plus meetings and have said, because you're white heterosexual males, we don't want you. Or they didn't say we don't want you, but it was told basically you were certainly handed your hat. This is the avatar of Micah Rumedia. Now he's a skeptic and he's got wise to some of this. And I've been talking to this guy. Same with this guy, Sargon of Akkad, he's another one. There is now a group of atheist skeptics who are now rebelling against this, and so they've started to see there's something wrong with the institution they're involved with. I hope that Rebecca Watson does as well, who the woman I told you about earlier, who was attacked and threatened and called names. I hope that she also learns to understand that. And more skeptics are getting wise to this. They haven't understood the other things, the other criticisms I've made about the skeptic movement, but at least this is a start. So why does it matter? What's really going on here? Now, these people here, I'm sure they're innocent people. Richard Dawkins, I'm sure they're innocent people. There's Michael Shermer there, Richard Dawkins. Lawrence Krauss is a friend of Richard Dawkins. A couple of other people I've not heard of. I think they mean well. I don't think I think they are deluding themselves. They're not deliberately trying to harm anyone. But they are presenting a false view of reality, and there's reasons why that is, and it could be connected to several different issues. This is Dr. Karen Douglas. Now in 2011 she did a lecture at the Conway Hall, which I attended, and it was very interesting because it was the psychology of conspiracy theories. Yeah, and we're the kind of people she wants to get on the couch, pick our brains and analyse us and say why it is we believe what we do, these crazy things we believe what we do. What's interesting about this lady is that last year she wrote another article which appears she's changed her mind. She actually said about the 9/11 truth movement that the actual believers in the conspiracy theory, so-called, are actually far more rational than those detracting it. She's actually admitted it. It's an extraordinary confession to make. And interestingly, Dr. Karen Douglas was due to speak at the Greenwich Skeptics in a pub last week, and she was dropped. I was going to go and see her at this event, and I didn't go in the end because she was actually, I don't know whether she cancelled it herself or someone else cancelled it for her, but several of her appointments have now been cancelled at various Skeptics in a pub events, and I wonder why that is.
She's probably been threatened.
Maybe she has. Now, there's several reasons why the government might not want us to know about certain things to do with skepticism, to do with the paranormal, conspiracies, spiritual, UFOs. I've done an entire talk on this called Energy, Politics and UFOs. But basically, in a nutshell, they don't want us to know about UFOs because they have organisations, the government, psychological think tanks like the Tavistock Institute and Rand Corporation, Brookings Institute. So every single assessment, every single invention and discovery is assessed by these people, and the government are then advised on whether or how or whether at all to release it to the public. It doesn't matter how beneficial this invention and discovery could be, how interesting it could be. The government will be assessing it for how it would affect their relationship with the people, with the citizens they rule. And if it's considered from their point of view there would be a negative effect, a detrimental effect, in other words, we might become more difficult to control, it never sees the light of day. UFOs are one of these things. And there's several different versions, several different reasons why. It could be psychological. They don't want us to know that we're not the only planet in the universe with life because it would affect the way we behave and our own relationship between countries and things like that, and stuff like that. And of course the energy issue, because these things have crashed. Flying saucers have crashed to the Earth's surface. They've been secretly salvaged by the government, and it's possible, I believe, that their power plants and propulsion systems have been analysed and back engineered, and technology has been gleaned from those. And this is technology would create free energy in abundance, and remove dependency on fossil fuels, which would make the world a far better place. It would mean poverty, environmental destruction wouldn't be a problem anymore. But it would perhaps mean the governments couldn't rule us so well. So let's weigh it up a minute. We don't get to see it. Conspiracy theories, of course, 9/11, etc. The skeptic movement is one of the gatekeepers that keeps these things from us. These bigger than big secrets, things that are quintessential to the world order we live in now. The government can't let us know. This is Helen Duncan. In 1944, this lady was jailed under the Witchcraft Act of 1735 for 9 months. I've done an entire presentation on this as well. But basically, it meant the government was essentially accepting that psychic powers, mediums were real, and for various political reasons, they had to take action against this lady, and she was sent to jail on a trumped-up charge in a kangaroo court. So there's many other things that the government might want to keep from us. So I'm nearly finished now. We're coming to the end here. Is this one of the things they're keeping from us? We go back to the beginning. Of course, the NBA laureates wouldn't like it because they wouldn't be special anymore. They wouldn't be brave. Well, what effect would it have, apart from the fact that they wouldn't be special anymore and they wouldn't be able to lord it over other people? What about the governments? How would they believe if it became effectively known and admitted that when we die, we don't disappear? Well, the churches wouldn't like it because they believe they hold the keys to heaven, and they say, you know, put money in our plate, or you go to hell. They wouldn't like that. But what about maybe there's another reason for it? If it became known, and when I say known, I mean accepted, admitted. And people, you might say, well, what does it matter? Because 80% of people believe in an afterlife anyway, or however many it is. So what's the problem with the government admitting something that we already know, that most people believe in anyway? Well, there's all the difference in the world, because it's to do with the Freudian father figure. Sigmund Freud described how the nation was like a family and the state was like the father. And basically, if you're a kid and you talk about fairies and things like that, and your dad says there's no such thing as fairies, son, is there a part of you that's kind of glad that he provides a level, he provides a sort of calming, rational kind of part of your life? He's a force in your life for rationality and for level-headedness. There's a part of you that is glad of that. And if your dad turned around to you and said, when you were 6 years old, and said, yes, there are fairies, there are, it might be a little bit disturbing. And that's the attitude of these people. It could be, for us to believe privately in something, whether it's UFOs or anything paranormal or life after death, is one thing. But to have it confirmed by that Freudian father figure in Westminster or the White House, that's another thing entirely. So that could be something else. So my basic point here is that skeptics are people. Who are they? They are ordinary people like everybody else. And they're not bad people, most of them. I have skeptic friends. I'm a member of Skeptics in the Pub in Oxford. I'm on their list. I attend their meetings. I know some of them. But they have an ideology. And they will not admit that they have an ideology. They will say things like, well, skeptics don't have a belief any more than the off switch is a TV channel, or something like that. And it's false. And they have to become aware of that. The reasons that they're wrong I've discussed in many different ways. Their own logical fallacies, the mistakes they've made in their research. In fact, this book here is what's remarkable about this book by Robert McLuhan is it goes back to source. It goes back to the original, say, the Society of Psychical Research papers. The skeptics, people like Richard Wiseman, who say there's no evidence for it, etc., etc. He's just quoting from modern skeptical literature. That modern skeptical literature is based on false research and by the biased research of people from the past. This guy has gone back to the original documents, he's looked through them, and his assessment is completely different. Psychical research, especially in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was really making progress. And skeptics dismiss it all. So I'm nearly done now. The reason it matters is because the skeptics are being used to spread false information about our world to the people through the media, in their personal lives, in other areas. It matters because some of the things they talk about are actually essential for human freedom. And coming to grips with these things are going to be essential for freeing ourselves from the grip of what I believe is an oppressive global regime, which is holding people back, is dominating people and enslaving people. That's why it matters. And if you want to know more about me, I just wanted to get back my website. Now, if you want to know more about me, I have a website here. Anything, I'm quite busy online. I'm quite a... There we go. Now, this is my website here, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. There's several blogs attached to that. It's updated most days. I've also got a YouTube channel, radio show, and I think there's a forum where you get rude messages about David Tredinnick and things like that. And of course I do live shows like this a lot. So I want to thank you for coming along to this one. You've been great. Thank you.
Take any questions if anybody
Is there time? It's almost 11 o'clock, but if anyone's got a question...
Very, very quickly, a couple of...
Maybe just one. If anyone's got a question they want to ask? First hand I see.
Any quick
No. Oh, it's getting late. Right. Thanks for coming, guys. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Slightly remiss of me, I forgot to advertise the last speaker before the summer recess. Next week we've got Michael